Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I love introducing you to people who are committed to working on their own development and to helping others become the best version of themselves. And I have to say, my guest today does this in spades. It's what he's all about. So I'm just very excited to introduce you all to Jay Steinfeld. Jay, welcome to my show.
Meredith, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, before we jump into why you exemplify, the kind of leader I love to talk to, I'd like to introduce you to my audience. Jay Steinfeld founded and was the CEO of Blinds.com, the world's #1 online window covering retailer. He started the company in 1996 for just $3,000 from his Bel Air, Texas garage. He and his team later changed the name to Global Custom Commerce, or CGG. The company was acquired by Home Depot in 2014. Jay remained on as its CEO, and he later joined the Home Depot online leadership team. He stepped away from these roles in early 2020, and he has, I love this term, Jay, rewired himself for new roles as advisor or board member for several companies, including the publicly traded company Masonite. He also teaches entrepreneurship at Rice University's Jones Graduate School of Business. And we're going to talk today about his fabulous book. I highly recommend all of you get a copy of it. It's called Lead from the Core: The 4 Principles for Profit and Prosperity. And it has been a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's also an amazing book on leadership. Whether you're starting your own company or you have a leadership role in an organization or you're running a company, there are so many great lessons there. And we're going to be able to, I guess, get a tip of the iceberg of those, Jay, today in our conversation. And I want to say up front, one of the things I love about you and your approach to leadership is your focus on people as #1, not the metrics, even though you acknowledge those are important. And more specifically, and of course, the name of my podcast is Grow Strong Leaders, and you focus on growing people. So it's just a perfect alignment. And one of the things I want to start off with is a quote that you define success as being constantly in the process of getting better and helping everyone around me get better than they ever dreamed possible. I just love that. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about how did you evolve to that particular definition of success? What does it mean to you?
Well, when I hear you say that, I think, well, that sounds really good. But I also think back to I used to be nothing like that at all. I was a typical micromanager and control person. But I also realized that the business was successful, but not as successful as it could be. And it wasn't until I realized that I needed teams to do all the things that I couldn't do, or the things that I could do but didn't want to do, and they could therefore do it better than I could. It was when I made the conclusion that the only way to do it is through other people. And it's actually a lot easier because you don't have to do as much work. That's when the business really took off. And it wasn't about this is my definition of success that you're reading. And success is not about attaining anything or selling your company to Home Depot or having a certain level of sales. Yes, those are measures of success. But for me, success is an intrinsic thing, something that you can say, boy, if I can get a little bit better at something or help somebody else get a little bit better today, well, you can be successful every day. Every day you can be successful. In fact, you can be successful multiple times during the day. I mean, isn't that just a more pleasant way to be?
It's less stressful for sure,
Yes.
too. And, I love the fact, because I just don't think I've ever heard another CEO say it quite like you did, about helping other people become more than they ever imagined that they could be. A lot of self-help books, personal development will talk about that, but to come from a CEO's perspective, that, says a lot about your vision, not just for yourself and the company, but for each person who worked for you. How did you bring that to life in the way you interacted with people and challenged them as they worked for you?
Well, that used to be helping people become better than what they ever believed possible, used to be one of our core values. We had 5 at one time.
Ah,
Then realized that, well, that's not really a core value. That's actually the purpose of the entire company. So the purpose of our company, as everybody knows it, is to help people become better than they ever believed possible. Now, that doesn't mean that it's just the people within the organization. It means helping people understand how they can help other people get better and how they can help service providers get better, stockholders, anybody that is a stakeholder in the company, and especially customers. So when you have people who are evolving and becoming better, one, why would they leave? There's no stagnation. They are actually becoming better people as a result of being in your organization. So if you want to improve retention, if you want to decrease hiring cost, if you're worried about the great resignation, well, then start thinking about your people a little bit more. Start respecting them. Provide generosity to them. I just don't think it's too much to ask to be generous and respectful to your people. That's what this really is about. And provide them with the personal development that they need to get better. I was having a conversation just maybe yesterday or the day before with the CEO, and it's a startup. And he said, wow, before I could just think about what is my vision and my go-to-market strategy, and I had 2 or 3 people. Now I have 25 people, and I've got to spend all this time on these people. I said, until you actually realize that that is your job now, to develop people, then you're going to look at this in the completely wrong way. Your job now is to develop leaders so that you don't have to do the work. And until you make that change, you'll never scale the business. So it's really, to me, it's just logical. It's not about being benevolent. It's not about being personally empathetic to people's or compassionate. It's just logic. It's just common sense. Be nice to people, and they will actually do more than you even ask them to do because they're feeling significant. And if you want to actually build something of significance, the first thing is help people feel and actually be significant. Listening to them, being clear with what your vision is, showing them where they are in that vision, and asking them, what is your personal vision? What do you want in your life trajectory? And how can I, as a leader, help you get there, whether it's in our company or outside? Because people who think that they're just in there for a little while and are going to be leaving somewhere else, when they realize they're getting better as a result of being with you, they'll stay longer. And they stay much longer than they even realized because they're getting better faster with you than without you. And now you've got all these people who are improving and helping everybody else improve. And you have this autonomous excellence that is happening. And that is such an easier way to lead than having to micromanage and tell people, do this, do this, do this, do that. Just sit back and watch everybody else do it. It's just so much easier.
Well, and
again, it's just common sense.
It is common sense. And you mentioned that it's logical. You also have a thread that runs throughout your book that I think is an important piece of this, which is you also have to be genuine and authentic in what you're saying. I remember one story you told about a fellow who was supposedly doing these things but people could tell it wasn't genuine. And so it fell flat. It didn't work. And so I would love for you to talk about what does it look like when someone is being authentic, and how did you guide this particular leader to make that shift where he became more credible to folks?
I remember that story really well. I remember actually where I was having this conversation. We do monthly one-to-ones with our key people. I say we do as if I'm still at the company. I left in May of 2020, but it's still my company and I still feel like I'm there. So this is a rising star, really smart person who is doing a great job, but wanted to actually one day actually have his own company. And it was a blocker for him, from my perspective, because he wanted people to do things and he was getting resistance. So he was doing these things that were more superficial, sending cards to people, but he wasn't really connecting with them on a human basis. It wasn't a humanity type of thing. It was just a technical tactic. And I asked him point blank, are you doing these things just to get people to do what you said? Or are you doing it because you actually care about them? And he looked at me and said, huh. And he knew he didn't really care. But once he really knew that that was something that was required as a leader. I mean, you don't have to, you could be a tyrant. There's plenty of tyrants out there, if that's the kind of leader you want to be, and if that's the organization you want to have. But if you want to have something that's a lot more fun and more expansive, then just be nice. And when he was actually asking people what they really wanted and listening and being an active listener and not trying to manipulate, he became a better leader. And he's gone on to lead a incredibly successful startup that's raised now hundreds of millions of dollars. I believe it's now a unicorn. And this has happened in a very short period of time. And it's because he made that jump and now he has hundreds of employees himself. It's really, I consider it one of my own greatest success stories, is when an employee goes out on their own and does whatever is interesting to them, and then uses some of the things they might have learned along the way from us.
That's great. Well, what you've just described, of course, is one of your 4 core values. It starts with E, the expressing yourself. You were expressing honest feedback and observations to him. And to his credit, he was open to hearing them. And, it took it to heart and really made changes. And I think that's a tribute to both of you, because he would have not realized that if you hadn't expressed yourself. I'd love for you to share the other 3, and we'll go a little bit deeper in each one of them because they're all very meaningful. And maybe start off by saying, how did you come to identify these 4 as the core values?
Well, first, let me be very clear that, like my earlier self, my enlightenment of core values was dark. I didn't believe in core values. I'm a CPA, or was a CPA. So everything was numbers, black and white, binary. None of the soft, squishy ideals created, been put on a plaque and hung on a wall and never thought of again. We've been to those places. Unfortunately, a few years into when we started full time at blinds.com, we started full time in 2001, although I went online in 1993. The next year, my wife, Naomi, who I'd been married to for over 25 years, passed away from breast cancer. And long story short, I had to do a complete reevaluation of my life and figured out that I better understand what makes me tick and what is happiness for me. What is success? How do I define these things? It felt like I needed to be able to survive. I needed to understand these things. and have been studying core values, happiness, neuroscience, all how biographies of other successful people. This is what I've done in large part to build myself and understand myself first so I could understand other people. So that's how it all happened. And it's evolved over time. The long story short of where we are right now, there are 4 E's. First E is to evolve. We've talked about this earlier, that it's you evolve, everybody evolves, and everybody helps each other get better. The second E is experiment without fear of failure. Well, if you're going to get better, you better have to take some chances and try something new. And usually when you try things new, they don't work. Most of the time, they don't work. So accept that. Understand what is the risk, downside risk. If you can live with the downside risk, there really isn't anything to fear. There's nothing to fear because you understand what the worst could happen. If that's okay, just keep going, especially if you can compare it to where you have large upside. So experiment without fear and evolve continuously. They go hand in hand, as does the express yourself, which is the third E. Because if you want to get good experiments, and if you want people to actually let you know that you are getting better or you're not getting better, you want people to be free to speak up to anyone, including you as the leader. So, and it's actually more fun when you don't feel stifled. It's more fun when you don't feel like you have to talk in a certain way or talk in some way that brown noses and it's the only way you can kind of get ahead. Now, if you want the business to get ahead, you need data and you want it from diverse people with diverse backgrounds. So you hire a diverse workforce and you get much better data to be able to make better experiments and to understand. And people will just naturally do this. And what's great about all this is if you work super hard and you experiment and knowing 70% of the time, probably they're not going to work and everybody accepts that, then people don't yell at each other about something not working and they go, yeah, of course that didn't work. We know 70% of the time it's not going to work, but how about that 20% of the time when it did work? And we furiously experimented so many times that now it's compounded and look what we're doing now. Can you even believe that we've now done $100 million in sales when we were just doing 30? How did we even get here? Well, I don't know, but we've been experimenting and we're working so hard. And that is fun. And that's the fourth E, to enjoy the ride. Enjoying is not about popcorn and free food, although we do that, and shuffleboard. It's about doing things that people said you could never do and working hard and overcoming the experiments and dealing with ambiguity and not necessarily knowing what tomorrow was going to be, but having a plan and being willing to experiment to improve yourself and everyone. That is fun for us. And that's what I really understood. Those were my 4 core values and have applied it to the business. And even after being at blinds.com and developing into the #1 online retailer of blinds in the world, I'm still doing it in rewirement. I'm still evolving. I'm joining boards that I've in industries I've never had any experience with. I'm on a public board, never done that. That's fun. So I'm enjoying the ride. I'm evolving. I'm experimenting, taking chances, and certainly expressing myself while I'm doing all that. So I'm not really doing anything differently, but just living my core values. And back to authenticity, you can't just say, these are what our core values are going to be in an organization. They really have to be true. And in my case, they are true. And people knew that that was true and knew that I really did want to help people become better than they ever believed possible. And when they trust you that you really are looking out for them, you can get away with so much more. You can get away with more weaknesses. You can get away with more indecision when you tell people, I don't know the answer to this. I've got 2 or 3 hypotheses as to what might work, but I really don't know which one is going to work. But here's the one we're going to try first. And we all go in it together and we realize that it may work, it may not work. And we try to figure it out early if it's not, and just stop and go, okay, that way didn't work. Let's try number two. That's fun. That's enjoying the ride.
There's so many things I want to pursue with what you've just said. One of them that was interesting to me that I think would be important for my listeners to understand, there were certain times, well, let me back up. Most of the time, you really wanted to give people the freedom to explore possible solutions, like you just said, and come up with something. But every now and then, you would see them struggling, and then you would step in and say, here's what we're going to do. And so you just determined, that it was inefficient to allow people to kind of be struggling is the word that's coming to me, where they couldn't reach agreement, they couldn't make the decision, they really didn't have the clarity. What are some criteria you used, or was it more of a gut feeling in determining those instances where you stepped in to make the decision?
Well, I can think of two offhand that were critical, and they all have to do with some fundamental things about the business as opposed to a particular strategy or particular tactic or process. So it was about culture, the environment. I think it's abundantly clear that culture is very important to me. And the way the office was designed, I didn't ask for opinions on this. I just did it the way I wanted to do it and told them, these are the colors, these are the rooms. Now, I got input from everybody, but ultimately this was not done by consensus, because this is my company and I've got a particular vision. The second thing is about vision. Once you have a vision, you want to get information from people. But there was a time when we had this technology and we were wondering whether we should build this new technology or not, which was becoming abundantly harder than we thought it was going to be. And then we were being told, this is a fool's errand. You should not continue doing this for a whole host of reasons, and I won't go into those. But ultimately, I knew that the technology that we were building was so important to the long-term vision of what we wanted to be as a company that we had no choice. We had to do it. Now, it wasn't existential, but if we really wanted to satisfy our vision and become better than what we ever believed possible, this was a dependency. So I just said, there was a meeting and they were talking about it for weeks. But eventually I went in and they said, well, here's where we are with this and here's where we are with that. And we're thinking maybe we're not going to do it. I just said, we're doing it. And 5 minutes later, I walked out. And they did it. And it actually became our secret sauce, besides culture, of a technology that when Home Depot started looking, they said, wow, this is pretty good. And what's great is this technology that we were almost going to stop building has been integrated into the entire Home Depot structure. Now, if you're in IT, the worst thing you can do is build something and then it never goes into production. They hate that. Mm-hmm. or it's almost worse to build something and then it not actually go into production than to cut your budget halfway through, because they kind of expect that. But to build it and then not, well, we built it and we were using it, and now it's in the 2,200 stores. It's on the website of Home Depot, a $140 billion company that's using technology. That's enjoying the ride. Mm-hmm. That's really fun. That is a very satisfying thing for really the whole company, because we all were part of that.
Mm-hmm. Those are both such great examples, I think, of paying attention. I think that's a key thing in leadership and in being the CEO, is looking at what's going on. How are people reacting? Picking up. In fact, I love your name for CEO besides Chief Executive Officer, Chief Environmental Officer.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about what you mean by that. What does that entail as far as the responsibility of the CEO?
Well, it means there's a military term about being super vigilant. I don't remember the exact term, but it's about vigilance. And vigilance means being on your toes and just looking around and understanding the landscape, understanding where is your enemy, where are your resources, where are your weaknesses, where are your people, what's your communication line, all these things that you need to do when you do your battle plan. Now, I was not in the military, but I studied some of this. And that's how you need to be as a leader. You need to be super vigilant as to what the environment is. So how did that office space get designed? Very open, very colorful, very expansive, like a startup, so that people would feel that there is high visibility and the great ability to communicate. So understanding your people and their gaps and the gaps within your organization. Where are your weaknesses and what do you need to do now to mine those gaps? And when will those gaps actually be timed so that they become not just inconsequential now, but consequential? So you can take steps today so that by the time they really become better or more pronounced, you're dealing with it. An example of that would be leadership. We were building a company, but we knew that we were not helping people learn how to be leaders. So we developed our own in-house leadership institute to help people become better leaders, because we knew at some point they would be in a leadership role with no training. And you can't expect people to be effective when you don't give them the right resources, time, training, development. So that's an example of that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, and that ties in with this, the value of evolve continuously. And one of the things that you mentioned of people wanting to stay, you had an amazing retention rate of, you had only 8% turnover, right?
Right.
Over the years. And so that's rather remarkable. And of course, it goes back to your hiring process, because you were intent on identifying the right people with the right fit for you.
Yes.
And so I would love for you to talk about, because so many people hire wrong, and I think you did so many things right. What were some of the things you looked for that would tell you this person is willing to evolve? What kind of questions did you ask? What were you looking for?
I think it's important first that just because evolve continuously is important to me, I can't actually believe that it would not be important to anyone else. But if the point is, whatever your core values are, whatever is really authentic for you, that's what you need to test. And in my case, evolving and experimenting and speaking up really needed to be tested. We didn't want people to come into the organization and realize, you know what, you're going to have to evolve every day, and go, what? I thought you were just going to tell me what to do, and I would do it. I'm a good soldier. Sorry, that's not going to cut it here. No, we want to know that right up front. So what we did is we wanted to find out whether people in their personal lives were already evolving in any way. So we'd ask them a question, tell me something you're doing right now, Meredith, to get better at anything that has nothing to do with work. And if they said, I'm taking a cooking class, great answer. I'm learning how to be a pilot. Wow, now that gets into experiment without fear and evolve. That's even better. So we would ask behavioral questions. Give me an example of some things that you did where you didn't really know what you were going to do, but you didn't have a map or anything, and you just felt a little insecure, but you did it anyway. Well, I traveled to Thailand with my best friend, and we had $100 and a backpack. Fantastic answer. I love that. That's experimenting without fear of failure. You had you not only dealt with ambiguity, you relished in it. It was fun for you to do that. So not everybody is like that. I think most people are not. But if you can find the people who are already demonstrating those types of traits, the traits that are important and authentic for your success, you have to make sure you test for that before they come in, or the organization will spit them out fast. Because when you tell somebody you are responsible for your own career, we will provide you with the tools and everything, but you're going to have to figure out how you're going to build yourself and your expertise. You go, that's a lot of pressure. Yeah, it is, but we think that's fun. We think building ourselves is pretty fun thing. So I would make sure that you're testing for these cultural things that are actually behavior. They're not goals. They're behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's.
I was looking at a scorecard for. I'm on this board, and I'm looking at a scorecard for a key person, and the recruiting firm brought it in, and the board showed me the scorecard. I said, "There's nothing on here about core values. Are we testing for core values?" And the CEO said, "Well, of course we're testing for core values. Well, shouldn't we make it explicit on the scorecard then? How important is it? To me, it's a litmus test. If they don't have it, they don't get hired. I don't care if they score hundreds on everything else." He goes, "Yeah, you're right." So we've added that to the scorecard. If you don't put that actually as part of the hiring process, then you're going to miss out on it. You think you're testing core values, but you're probably just testing likability.
Mm. Wow. That really brings up an interesting question to me. With the different board positions you have and advisory positions you have with a variety of companies and different industries, what are some of the common issues, problems you're seeing them deal with that you feel that you've been able to really make a difference? Like you just said with this scorecard, what are some other ways that you might be able to provide some insights? I'm just thinking of some of my listeners who may be struggling with some of the same things that these other companies are, and some insights you might share that would be helpful for them.
I think the main thing is something that probably will not surprise you or any of your viewers or listeners. Metrics are very important. Benchmarking yourself against yourself. When I say evolve, you don't just do this and not know how much you're evolving. You have to measure it. You have to measure evolution. You have to measure your experiments. But if you just look at metrics and you don't look at people and you don't think about what's in it for them and how am I going to keep them excited about our vision, excited about where we're going, what their role is in it, and you think it's just something that you have to do because, well, I better do it or they're going to leave. If you think it's like generosity, it's not about doing what is the least amount I can do and get away with it, which applies to your people and your customers. A lot of people think, what's the least amount we can do? No, think of it completely flipped around and say, what is the most I can do and still have it make sense for the long-term benefit of this business? If you flip that around, that's the kind of stuff that I talk about in these meetings. Like, how come we're not talking about people? We're not talking about organizational structure. We're not talking about roles. Who is actually responsible for this metric? Or how come they're only responsible for this numerical number and not quality? Shouldn't we be mixing quality and quantity together? Things like that create the right motivation for having the right person and the right team of approaching so that the metrics will be better and we're not just looking at numbers. That's the thing, is just looking at numbers and not looking at root cause, which is usually people, or thinking that person's not working out. Well, why isn't that person working out? Is it because of you? Did you hire the wrong person? Did you put him in the wrong role? Did you not give him the right training, the right expectations? All these things, is the process wrong so that most people would have failed in that job? Those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about more. Just bringing humanity back into the workplace. That's all I'm trying to do.
I just love that. And, thinking about the one on, expressing yourself, and how I've seen so many leaders who are reluctant to give feedback that would be really meaningful and helpful. Instead, they keep hoping that the person will see it for themselves or they avoid it. Do you see that also as a behavior among many of the leaders in the
I
company?
had that behavior. There's a part in the book where I wasn't
I
honest
remember that.
with
I didn't want
somebody.
to point a finger at you.
Yeah. So yeah, I see it all the time. I saw them in myself. My kids actually said the same thing about me. Like, why don't you just tell us what you're thinking and stop being nice to us? Okay. So yeah, I see that, but it also goes the other way too. I see leaders who will not actually be honest with their board, or I see executives who won't talk to the CEO in a direct way for fear of having a dissenting view and feeling like, well, I'm not on board. I'm not a team player. Well, a team player actually helps the team by letting people know about issues, problems, fragility. Doesn't everybody want to at least understand what the risk is before you go in? Doesn't mean you don't do it, but raising red flags about potential risk is smart. Any military plan is always about, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we do when, if they do this, or if they do that, or if we've miscalculated this, what happens then? You should do all that, scenario planning. But you definitely need to be clear with all your people and make sure that they're speaking up and telling you the truth. And that applies to you as well.
And so what is it a leader could do to make it safe for people? Again, going back to this environmental officer in this regard, what can they do to model and create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up?
Well, you can talk to a new employee who's going into their first meeting and say, look, I know you might be a little bashful, but you're smart, or at least I think you're smart, and I hired you for your brain, not to sit in a chair. And I want you to know that if you speak up and you disagree, I will love it. I would love it if you would disagree with me in public. So don't be afraid. Now, they're still going to be afraid, almost, because just that's the way people are generally trained. But if somebody does speak up, especially if they're new, a great thing to do is, before you answer the question, just say, I just want everybody to know that Meredith is living our core value of expressing herself, because she's disagreeing with me and I love it. Thank you so much for doing that. That's the kind of things that you do. And then you answer the question, and it could be that you disagree, but say that first and let them know that you appreciate that. And if you're not going to do it, tell people why you're not going to do it, what your thinking is, and or put it on a list like you do with your grandkids and your children. Yeah, I'll get you that. I'll just put it on the list, and then later on and during Christmas, we'll go to the list. And that usually gets you 10 months.
Buys you some time.
It buys you some time, yeah. But you definitely do need to put it on the list. And if a customer tells you something, or an employee, and you end up doing it, go back to that customer, go back to that employee and tell them, remember that idea you had a year ago or 8 months ago or whenever it was? We're doing it. Thank you. And now all the customers or all employees are benefiting from your suggestion. That's respect. That's letting them know, I've appreciated you expressing yourself, and now people are benefiting as a result of you doing that. Well, they're going to be much more likely to continue doing that.
Absolutely. Boy, there is a lot of gold there in just that segment of our conversation, but the whole conversation has so many valuable nuggets. What I really love about the points you just made are for the leader to kind of, I mean, it's a sense of empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of the people, let's say, that are coming into this meeting, and imagining what they might be thinking, and addressing it proactively and upfront, directly, expressing yourself and saying, here's what I want from you, and here's what I would appreciate, as opposed to just silently expecting that and then possibly being disappointed or irritated if they don't deliver and nobody speaks up. I
Right.
think this whole thing of personal responsibility of the leader asking, what do I need to do to create the situation that's going to allow people to be honest and be open? And I also love what you just said about going back to the person whose idea was implemented, because otherwise they don't realize how much it was appreciated if you don't let them know.
Right. And not just say we did it, but actually let them know what the specific results were. Thank you for that idea, because we were able to increase our gross margin by 20%. And that extra dollar we're using to start up our new ESG, or we're starting the money we're saving now is going to go into a bonus pool, or we now have a little greater cash flow as a result of it. So we can now invest more into more things like whatever. So not just say thank you, be very specific when you compliment people to let them know what the actual results were as a result of that suggestion.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, as we're winding down in our time, Jay, I was curious if there's anything else, either from your book or from your experiences, that you would love to leave as a takeaway for my audience.
Whoa. The takeaway. I think
Whatever
that
I asked you about that you're really excited about sharing.
I think that if people would experiment, and don't use the word experiment if it scares you, use test and learn, something like that. And just develop a little grace for yourself. Don't expect yourself to be perfect. Don't proclaim to anyone that you are. Just try something new. Exercise your experiment muscle by go to a new restaurant, try a new salad dressing, just do something a little bit new. Even though you probably won't like it, you're still going to try something new. And over time, you start getting a little bit more sympathy and empathy for yourself to do these things. And then you start thinking about other people. So deal with this ambiguity of what is right and what's wrong by just saying, I don't know what's right and wrong. I'm not sure what's going to work, but I'm just going to try something a little bit different. And over time, you may be doing a lot of things a little bit different. And then you're going to say, man, this is fun. I'm having a good time. And I think having a good time is a good pursuit.
It is. I love your fourth, enjoy the ride. And I really appreciate your bringing that up, because what I have discovered, the more that we can give ourselves grace, as you said, the more we can give grace to others. It's when we are writing ourselves so intently, seriously, and expecting so much from us, and that we have that same unrealistic standard from other people. And so it all ties in together. I think looking after ourselves, taking after ourselves, and you mentioned this a number of times in the book too, the importance of a leader taking time to nourish themselves, take care of themselves in order to do the best at taking care of the people in their organizations.
You have to model that behavior for other people too. If you want people to do that for themselves, then you need to do it.
Yes.
They're going to be taking a lot of cues and clues from you. So model the behavior.
That's great summary advice. Jay, I really could talk to you for hours, and one day we will do that, because there's so much depth to you. I want to reinforce to my listeners to grab a copy of your book and read it and study it, because there are so many nuggets in there that can be great reference points at anywhere but no matter what kind of job or business they have. So lead from the core, and you'll learn all about these 4 core values that Jay lives by himself. How can people connect with you and get a copy of your book, Jay?
Well, you can buy the book almost anywhere. So all the usual places you can get it. And I just actually, the audiobook just came out a couple of weeks ago, which I narrated. So that seems to be doing well also. But I have a lot of connections on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty frequent publisher of information there. And then my website, you can subscribe there at jaysteinfeld.com.
Great. Well, Jay, I want to thank you for being with me today and acknowledge you for the wonderful things you did with your own company and that you're now doing with all these other companies. So I love your rewiring and your current wiring as a human being. You're really special.
Thank you, Meredith. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.